Supposedly you can connect them, but I don't know how to connect it from Facebook.
If you have another stand, I can do that. Yes.
You ready to sit with me?
Yeah.
Oh, I should have brought the tote bags.
Can you bring it to the social?
I'll bring them to the social. Sorry, I forgot.
Yeah. Well, I have a tote bag if you want.
Oh, I know. I have like 8 of them in my house because I picked them up from Alex.
Oh, okay.
But I should bring. Do you think people will want them? If you
We have a lot, so you can probably store them.
Okay, I'll keep them for the fall, I guess.
Yeah, that would be great.
Sorry, it wasn't helpful with wiring. Are you recording on that as well? Oh, that's
Sure you got this about reunions.
Oh, thank you, David.
Yeah.
Hi. It's Flynn.
Good to see you.
You too.
When you're sitting, you're
Should I sit further back? Should I sit further back? Oh, sit wherever you want. Gosh, sit wherever you want. Okay.
how was the travel here?
Fine.
I've given out almost all of the extra totes that we had packed.
Great.
To like,
Yeah.
tomorrow I gave one to give one to Carl.
Do you want? Where did I put mine? Right behind you. Right behind you. Do you want to?
Oh, just the.
Do you want to? If you need more, take them
No,
over there.
I've got like one or two more. I gave a bunch of buttons and stickers to Maya to give out.
Okay.
Jessica's giving and stuff. She's the only one that signed up besides Luke. But yeah, we have giving out stuff.
That's great.
Carl's gonna give out stuff. I also gave my professor, and I met with another professor yesterday. It's probably no one. She can announce it and announce it at the end.
Amazing to see.
Hi, welcome to this historic gathering at the historic junction in the Princeton Divest So Princeton has divested, as many of you know, from publicly traded fossil fuel companies to the tune of $1 million. And it has stopped taking money from 19 coal and tar sand corporations. So that is a huge development that has arisen from the intergenerational grassroots forces, the ethical forces from below that this movement represents. But however, Princeton still has $700 million in private equity fossil fuel investments and is still partnering with Shell and BP, and so we're calling for those investments and partnerships to end. As the slogan says, divest the rest. The hard yards have been won, but we need to get to the finish line. And just on a slightly personal note, I would say that each generation finds itself often facing a global ethical challenge or ethical calling. For myself and my partner and Princeton colleague, beloved Anne McClintock, during our student years, it was the divestment campaign against apartheid. And there are many differences between these two campaigns, but I do think they both focus on the defining ethical issues of the time. And as some of you might remember, back in the 80s, the Reagan administration and Thatcher were pushing for constructive engagement with the apartheid regime, which meant basically unethical business as usual, and the regime was blocking all the way to the bank because they knew that would be kicked down the road further and further. But similarly to that moment, in Makosh at 28, we're connecting to a global movement, a really powerful and diverse planet-straddling movement of religious institutions, NGOs, philanthropies, entire cities, corporations, trade unions, and so forth, who have decided to divest from fossil fuels. And that gives us a sense of community far greater than this room and far greater than Princeton. So we're reaching out to those millions of allies today, saying we're with you. We will do everything in our power to ensure that Princeton's considerable financial resources and even greater symbolic clout are invested in this movement. So let me introduce the first of our four speakers today, who's Tom Taylor, 2021. Tom is a policy analyst at Atlas Public Policy, where he works on implementing federal climate funding and analysis of electric vehicle adoption. Before coming to the US, Tom worked in state government in Melbourne, Australia, and while an MBA student at Princeton, he co-founded Divest Princeton. So please join me in welcoming Tom.
Thank you so much. Today I want to talk about narrative, and I realized a little bit too late into writing this speech that I would be talking about narrative in front of an English professor, and so I want to apologize in advance for all the ways in which I'm not technically talking about narrative. In 2004, BP released a carbon footprint calculator. The calculator was a tool for people to determine how their daily lives, including going to work, buying food, and traveling, was responsible for heating the globe. On the face of it, this tool and the corresponding campaign from a PR company called Ogilvy and Mather seemed pretty innocuous, and maybe even good for the planet. Also, in 2004, I was 12, and becoming a militant environmentalist, I grew up in the hills of Adelaide, Australia, where I would yell at my parents for not taking the train to work. The gravest sin in our house would be that you would leave the light on in a room, and my siblings and I would barrel through the trash cans on our street and the street over, pulling out cans and bottles to recycle. BP, like many companies before it, had managed to shape the narrative on climate change and put the burden and all of the guilt onto the consumer. I was the problem, and my failures were causing climate change. Little environmentalists all around the world understood that if we just turned off the lights and reduced our carbon footprint a bit, we could get this climate thing under control. Now, narrative always seems like one of those college words, one of those words like journey or problematic that you use in every second sentence in college and then never again. So maybe it's because I'm back on campus, but the term narrative is seeping back into my blood. The narrative shapes our whole sense of what is possible, what we've done before, and where we are going. Our leaders are constantly trying to read the narrative and shape the narrative. Narrative matters. Narrative particularly matters to oil and gas companies. Just look at their spending. From just 5 companies, Exxon, BP, Chevron, Shell, and ConocoPhillips, spent $3.6 billion on advertising from 1986 to 2015. The spending goes up sharply when 2 things happen. 1, that they're getting negative media attention, and 2, when Congress is considering climate legislation. These companies have used this $3.6 billion to develop sophisticated advertising campaigns like the carbon footprint or Beyond Petroleum, campaigns featuring solar panels or people in lab coats talking about the carbon intensity of their products. They've used the $3.6 billion to feature shots of Princeton University overlaid with Exxon logos talking about things like green algae. The narratives shift over time, but the through line is this: whatever the question, oil and gas is the answer. The only way that we will get strong climate action is that if we're able to bend the narrative back to independent climate science. It is through organizing and educating, through lifting up research, and through making the case over and over and over again that we need systemic solutions for systemic problems, that we can chip away at their enormous cash advantage. Including through the efforts of people here, Divest Princeton has become one of the best PR firms that we have. Moreover, it's the only one we can afford. Through Divest Princeton, we push back against the narratives that my parents are to blame for climate change because they didn't take the train, that my neighbours are to blame for climate change because they didn't recycle, and that my brother is to blame for climate change because he didn't turn off the light. It is our work to hold these companies accountable for what they have done and what they are doing. When we divest, when we take their names off websites, when we ensure that they're not welcome at influential conferences anymore, when we call out their bullshit, we push back on the narrative that oil and gas companies have spent so much money trying to construct. When we take action, we set new norms about what we're willing to accept. I have never been more convinced of the power and the importance of the protester, the activist, the agitator, the one who asks the uncomfortable question, the faculty and staff who demand that their pensions aren't fueling climate destruction, the students that hold a die-in to protest BP's continuing presence on campus, and the alumni that never go away. So thank you for coming along, and I encourage you at some point today to turn to the person next to you and introduce yourself. And I look forward to the panel. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Our second speaker is Claire Kaufman, 2023. Claire has just finished her MPA at Princeton in May 2023, where she led the Divest Princeton investigation into fossil fuel money in campus research. Prior to graduate school, she spent 5 years in Arizona working in environmental nonprofits and advising the former mayor of Tucson on planning, transportation, and sustainability policy. She's now planning to work at the intersection of federal climate and energy policy and environmental justice. Please join me in welcoming Claire.
Thank you all for being here. summer, I was at the Department of Energy working on energy efficiency and renewable energy when IRA passed. And a few prominent studies from Princeton were constantly referenced in the development of said policy. Nowhere was it referenced that those studies were funded by the oil and gas industry. My interest in divestment comes from the angle of policy, working in local government and then studying that summer at DOE. Governments are constantly relying on studies that are done by nonprofits, NGOs, think tanks, and especially universities. And especially for climate change, it's imperative that those studies are impartial, imperative for how we shape our economy, imperative for life and death reasons. When I found out that Exxon and BP give millions every year to fund climate research at Princeton, I was shocked and got involved. Specifically, Exxon and BP. Exxon has given around $9.5 billion over the past 10 years, and BP has given over $26 million over the past 10 years. It's a stretch to think that these companies, with everything they have to lose with climate change, are funding climate research just for fun. So why would they be funding climate research? At best, they're just trying to greenwash. They're trying to get their little stamp of approval. Maybe they're also just implicitly influencing the professors that get their money because those professors probably want money again in the future. More likely, they're influencing the research topics, and then at worst, they're influencing research outcomes. So we wanted to see if that was happening here. We started by trying to talk to PhD students, but we quickly found out that many of their activities on campus were quite concealed. It was hard even for the PhD students to figure out who they were getting funding from, and were often even stymied in their attempts to write conflict of interest statements on the research they were publishing. Around this time, I decided for fun to audit an undergrad class on around carbon capture technologies, so I could understand more, and I sat next to a full-time Exxon employee in class. I did not at all intend to do this, and we started talking because we were the two oldest people in class. And it was pretty shocking. He not only was just like he wasn't a fly on the wall, he was an active participant in class. He piped up in conversations, he taught the class when the professor was out of town, and when I talked to him on the side, he laughed at the prospect that Exxon would ever fund renewables. He only said maybe Exxon would fund offshore wind because we already have offshore drilling. And I think that just brings home the point that they are a business, these companies are businesses, and expecting them to do anything other than support their bottom line is fantasy. So, while this was happening, Princeton divested from publicly traded fossil fuel companies and dissociated from companies involved in thermal, with a majority in thermal, or with a significant amount in thermal coal and tar sands. That was in September, a huge step forward, but there was a lot of gaps in that policy. First, companies involved in misinformation were not included, as were oil and gas companies in general. The Exxon employee that I met suggested that Exxon might just spin off a tar sands subsidiary and come right back. That's why we're not done yet. Fossil fuels on campus are dangerous at Princeton and elsewhere. Again, not just at Princeton. I was part of a Data for Progress study that found over $677 million spent by Exxon, BP, Chevron, Shell, ConocoPhillips, and Koch Industries from 2010 to 2020 across 27 universities. $677 million. Again, they're not just doing this for fun, and that's often what the counter-argument is. Not for fun, but, that they're not having an actual influence on the outcomes. Fossil fuel companies drive misinformation, they violated human rights, undermine the energy transition, and threaten university academic integrity and independence. They often fund research on things like carbon capture and storage, which will prolong their business model, instead of things like solar and other renewable energies to drive the energy transition. Again, it's hard to imagine a scenario where funders' interests are not impacted, where funders' interests don't impact research outcomes, such as when Marlboro funded studies on tobacco. So the next steps are full divestment and full dissociation, rejecting all funding from fossil fuel companies. BP is still here. While Exxon was kicked out because of its involvement in thermal coal and tar sands, BP is still here, funding the Carbon Mitigation Initiative, which was effectively created to support BP and help it rebrand as a climate leader. Princeton research is instrumental in the climate policy world. And if it's compromised, we have a lot to lose, and we're doing a huge disservice to our planet. So to end, money talks. That's why we're all here. And with money talks, and we have a lot of work to do, but have already made significant progress. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Claire. So our next speaker is Tina Speak, 1997. Tina serves as climate envoy for the government of the Republic of the Marshall Islands, working to identify solutions and to support her country as it contends with the impacts of climate change. Tina also serves as international liaison for the Marshallese Educational Initiative, a non-profit in Springdale, Arkansas, that was created to serve Marshallese communities living in the U.S. Please join me in welcoming Tina.
Yellow, which is how we say hello in the Marshall Islands. It's really wonderful to be here, especially to be here in the company of those who have worked from the bottom up to change and shift Princeton from what was a lighter position. And as a person who came to Princeton from a very small country in the Pacific in the 90s, and I came here to be a part of what was cutting edge, right? I remember thinking, I have to go where the best minds are and where the best research is happening so that I can do what I need to do to support the people in my country. And at the time, the issue for us, and it's still an issue, was the impacts of the nuclear testing conducted by the United States in the Marshall Islands. And you probably all know a Marshallese word, even though you may not know you know it, and that word is bikini. The word bikini came from Bikini Atoll in the Marshall Islands. The U.S. conducted many nuclear tests there, and as a young person and as a student, I was grappling with that legacy and trying to understand how to confront it. And I decided that the best way to do that was to come again where the research was strongest, we had the best minds. And in my career since leaving Princeton, we are now confronted in my country with another tidal wave of impacts from the outside, and this time it's in the form of climate change. And once again, something we had nothing to do in terms of creating, but we're on the front lines of on the front lines of responding. Just to give you an idea of what the Marshall Islands looks like and is, we're in the Pacific, about 4.5 hours flying a bit south and west of Hawaii on the way to Guam. For those of you who remember World War II, we were part of that advance of the Americans across the Pacific as they went toward Japan. And if you go to Washington, D.C., you'll see one of the islands named in the World War II Memorial, Kwajalein. And we are a nation of atolls. Atolls are what is left after billions of years of a volcano subsiding into the ocean, and around the ring of the volcano you have coral that grows and creates strings, necklaces of islands that sit at about 6 to 8 feet above sea level, 2 meters. And the science, getting back to the through line, which I think of this conversation, whether it's, although it might be narrative, and I'll take that up in a minute. But the through line for those who really want to understand and also respond to the climate crisis is the science. And we do have very strong, robust science that's come through the IPCC, which is the UN organization that essentially takes all of the science and looks at it and puts out reports that are quite conservative, in fact, because it's not original research. They amass all of the research that exists globally. They look at it very carefully and they decide, to then proclaim what we should be expecting based on that science. And the projections are, for my country in particular, very grim. So, as I said, we sit at about 6 to 8 feet above sea level. And with the lowest emission scenario of 1.5, which is a global temperature target that the Marshall Islands and other islands championed and worked our butts off to insert into the Paris Agreement that was agreed in 2015 as what we should all be striving to meet to secure the safety of the future of our planet. At that lowest scenario, we're looking at a projection of about 20 inches or half a meter of sea level rise in 50 to 70 years. Now, in a country where you're 6 to 8 feet above sea level, that means most of our islands become uninhabitable, if not all, unless we do major adaptation in the form of hard engineering solutions as well as other solutions. In other words, we would have to build islands, not just raise buildings, but build land, reclaim land. Many people think we'll have to migrate, and we haven't accepted that as a viable choice, because migration means extinction, really. It means the loss of not just our lands, but it means the loss of culture that's tied very directly to those lands. All of our lands have names. We are a matrilineal culture. They're passed down through the female line. I can tell you my lands and their names, and they're not just mine, but of course they connect me to a clan, a family, and to all the stories that come along with that. And so we know what it means to also, we know based on our history with the testing what it means when you have to leave your lands, because we still have communities who, as a result of the testing, live in exile from their islands. They live in other islands, or what a crisis, what a climate crisis really means. And I think as I come back here to this beautiful campus with all of the joy and spirit that goes into reunions, what happens is sometimes you don't realize the crisis when you're in the midst of that. It's hard. It's hard to really understand how fundamentally changed our world would be, even at 1.5. But by the way, we're on a track to 2.73 is kind of the ambitious projection based on the different policies that governments have, the different plans. They're still working on the policies to make those plans come to fruition, which is why it's an ambitious to say that we're on track for 2 point plus. You know, in the Marshall Islands right now, we're at 1.1, and we have king tides that happen every month or 2 months or so. And with those king tides, it's not a storm, it's just a very, very high tide. We have the waters coming over the coast. Essentially, it's all coast. There's no interior in the Marshall Islands. It's just one long coast. And in parts of the island, the water's bubbling up through the land. That's where we are at 1.1. And so 1.5 is the lifeline for my country. But what I try to really impart to others is that it's the lifeline for yours too. I think it's hard to, as I said, understand in such a beautiful location where there's so many resources and so many ways that we can sort of mitigate the difficulties that the planet is going through, whether it's through air conditioning or building seawalls. You know, I'm living in New York City now, where I'm based, and there's lots of really, really wonderful plans, and there's lots of money to build adaptation measures and save battery cities and build up a bunch of walls. There's money for that, and it's there. Yeah, but it's not actually going to do what we need as a planet necessarily, certainly. But it's also not where I and my children are not going to be safe in New York City. I don't think so, because things are going to change so fundamentally in our world. The whole systems of this, the weather patterns, how we get our food, where there's water and where there's not, where people will be forced to leave and then come in over borders because they have no way to sustain themselves where they live. This is what is coming. And the thing is that this is a preventable crisis. The science is also telling us how to deal with it. Renewables, an explosion of renewables. We need the finance. We need the finance to go to that. Trillions are going to fossil fuel companies, and that needs to change. There's so many, there are paths forward, but unless we have movements like Divest Princeton in the hallowed institutions of the world where so many of the best minds and so many of the resources are flowing, unless those places take leadership, because then we're not going to get to where we need to go. So I would say, yes, narrative matters, leadership matters. And that's something that the Marshall Islands has been trying to show in its small way on the global stage. And it's really heartening to see that that's something that we join with Divest Princeton in pushing our leaders to do what needs to be done, and our institutions. Thank you.
I do what I do today because I think climate is the biggest existential risk to our planet. And as most of you would agree, we have a little bit more time in which to solve this problem, which is then placed behind the Divest the Rest movement. So, if you think of the question, why not? Why should we divest the rest? And a lot of people say, well, why tie our own hands? Why don't we just let the fund, the Princeton endowment make as much money as it can? After all, the money's going to a good cause, education. Run a campus that has, Rockefeller College. That money came from oil. Maybe you live in an apartment or a house with a gas stove. Why be so strict about things? I would say that even if you take that view, the world is already divesting. Profit maximizing companies, governments that really don't care or might even deny climate change are investing in renewable energy, and Princeton's endowment can do the exact same thing. For example, what is the biggest state for wind power? Texas. Exxon is increasing its investment in renewable energy every year. So are all the oil and gas companies. In 2022, actually, over 50% of the new investment in energy was solar, and over 75% of it was renewable. So there's really no reason why Princeton University's endowment needs to invest in fossil fuels, even if you just take a pure consequentialist view of things, that we need to maximize profits because they're going to benefit this great university. In 2022, the so-called IRA, Investment Reduction Act, passed, which is a major bill that seeks to supercharge energy efficiency and clean energy investments in the United States. There are many provisions within that bill that Princeton could take advantage of. For example, for many years there's been 30% investment tax credit for renewable energy. So if you put solar panels on your roof and it costs you $100, you can save $30 on your taxes. But you only take advantage of that if you have a tax liability. So if you're a nonprofit, that doesn't really help you at all. But in the IRA, now you could sell that tax credit, which means anyone, a nonprofit institution like Princeton, or a person who has low income and no tax liability, could still monetize that tax credit. So that's just one example of a way that Princeton endowment could benefit and profit from investing in clean energy as opposed to fossil fuel energy. So I'll leave it at that and look forward to your discussion.
Thank you so much, Lee. So we have about 20 minutes, and one of the things that Princeton typically endows its students with and graduates is rhetorical skills. So I'm asking you to channel your most succinct version of your rhetorical skills, and particularly because it is a subject that is susceptible to monologuing. If you could at least least in bed question, and you're very, very weak. And so we've got a wonderful group of panelists. You can direct your question to the individual panelists or to the group in general if you wish.
So when we talk about investment philosophy, what could be down the road to investment instead? When we talk about a research capacity, there are the U.S. has lots of kind of research about it, many of things. There is not that same level of detail on impact on places like Marshall Islands. There are so many questions around answering what could this research if they were not occupied in the kind of carbon capture of the world. So that should all what could we do with these resources and what these mines would be solved.
Well, first you could invest in clean energy projects. So there are, as I said, there are investment tax credits. There are all types of state and federal incentives. And it's just fundamentally, the sun is free, the wind is free. You have to do a lot of work, spend a lot of money to dig oil and gas out from the ground. So these things are fundamentally profitable, especially on a large scale. Princeton has the dollars to invest in on a large scale. So there's plenty of money to be made by investing in wind energy, geothermal, biogas. You take biogas. I mean, Princeton is a large institution, produces a lot of waste. They could make money from that if they wanted to. So there's just a lot of things that they can do with the money that's currently being invested in fossil fuels.
Thank you. Thank you for your work. In the Divest the Princeton movement, it seems a major focus of your efforts is to discontinue Princeton's investment in fossil fuel industries. Is there any thought given to tying it together with incentives for transforming from fossil fuel related investments to sustainable kinds of investment by the same entity? Can you tie those two together in a way that might be attractive to an existing commercial entity who's trying to wean away from the old way to some new way? Can you build incentives into that conversation?
You mean from an existing investment? Probably not. And also, we should just add that just because we're divesting from fossil fuels, we have to automatically invest in renewable energy. It might be taking away from fossil fuels and invest in whatever the highest earning things that type of agriculture,
is there any way that that reinvestment strategy could monetize or find a way to even like, I'm not a lawyer, but like monetize risk or monetize these actions that have to be taken at the state level to react to this law, which is basically about not building overburdened communities, more polluting facilities, petrochemical infrastructure, other things that we know harm people and cause long-term public health problems. So there are like risks embedded in those kinds of actions that like our insurance industry and other actors don't actually attend to as externalities. And so I just wonder at the state level, like I study history of New Jersey, I'm an environmental historian now. This state has industrialized so quickly compared to other states. I mean, California is another example, and maybe Texas. And in that sense, has certain laws now that they kind of have to take because there's all these polluting sites. And so I just wonder how momentum could be built around actions at the local Princeton level, in this township, in this county, and at the state level to actually like really do something regionally and locally with like the investment process. So to kind of connect, like they have divested from, is it public? So whether it's just building momentum around that and where these assets go, or the next step, which is the private divest the rest, it just seems like an opportune argument to me. And I don't know if you thought about that. I just came to me as we're sitting here, but I think New Jersey government is also kind of corrupt, so we need to kind of understand where we can move the needle with maybe good faith planning efforts and community level building actions.
Yeah, well, I have a few thoughts on that. So, I guess on the city, county, on the municipal level, I think this happens just for policy to change. For example, to say, like in New York City has said, you know, starting in 2035, all buildings must be all electric. You can't build a building that uses fossil fuels. Right? So you just have to change the policy and then you have to deal with it. The good thing is, it's actually cheaper and better if you develop it actually over a long term. It's cheaper, so you don't really need an incentive for it. To your other question, oh, yes. More Princeton comes in. Princeton has a very large effect, a lobbying effect on the city of Princeton. I'll tell a small story. When I was in school, the township of Princeton, or city of Princeton, wanted to shut down the street, or we wanted to be able to enter eating clubs and take kids' IDs to see people. And we
Yeah, it's a good question about where the authority comes from, but it's like they work very closely with the administration, so I don't imagine it was making that unilaterally.
Well, thanks. So two more questions. And
Hi, Hannah Heineken, Earth Tree. Well, first of all, thank you very much for this event. So it's great to hear the progress that you guys are making on the divestment work. I came a little late, so just wanted to hear if there was an update on the lawsuit. The request to the New Jersey Attorney General to investigate Princeton University for its imprudent investing. And particularly because there has also been a lawsuit filed by the AGs on the oil and gas industry regarding this information. And so hearing what you were saying about how the oil and gas industry essentially has been excluded, I mean, it sounds to me like this information on the Princeton University side as well. So if you have any comments about that. And then following the other question about engagement versus divestment, again, many asset managers are committing to net zero by 2050 and really laying out their trajectory for how they're going to be reducing their portfolio emissions. And so just wondering if you've talked with the trustees about that, including whether they would consider changing their asset management. Thank you.
If we could, I guess I'll crowdsource an answer to the first question. Do you want to talk about the lawsuit?
Yeah, well, I can just say, so in February 2022, we launched a legal complaint. So not actually a lawsuit, just like anyone can bring a legal complaint in the state of New Jersey. So we did that, saying that Princeton as a nonprofit has a higher standard of obligation in terms of what it does with its investments. It can't invest in things that run counter to the mission of the establishment. So we were initially told that the New Jersey Attorney General was not going to look into it, but it just we went back and said, are you sure? Can you have another look? And so we've never heard back again. In the meantime, in October, the New Jersey Attorney General himself, his office, is suing the API, BP, Shell, Exxon, ConocoPhillips, and what's the fifth one? Chevron, for lying to the citizens of New Jersey for the last 50 years. So it's an extremely strong lawsuit that the New Jersey Attorney General is taking forward, and they just had another victory that Hoboken and New Jersey can move forward in state and municipal courts with these lawsuits. So at the moment, we're sort of letting the Attorney General run with his own lawsuit because we're pretty happy about that one. But ours is still sitting there. And we sometimes think that maybe, maybe they got a little background from ours.
Final question, please.
So looking at the size of the endowment, I'm seeing it's $35.8 billion that the university has at this time, the last fall. How much of the endowment are we talking about? I heard it's $700 million. We're talking about the rest, whatever the investments is. Putting it in perspective, is that pretty much the right ballpark?
Yes.
So about 170 of the endowment. I think they can handle that.
And just to quickly answer your other question, Hannah, about net zero stuff, I think one thing we have to be really skeptical of is bullshit commitments, right? And so when we're looking at these companies and when they're talking about net zero, but they're not incorporating scope 3 emissions, which is where all of their emissions happen, so that's the end user, and for BP that's something like 2/3 of their emissions. They only talk about scope 1 and 2, and then when they're talking about scope 1 and 2, they're offsetting a ton of those emissions with offsets that we don't have any confidence in. And so it's really hard to put all of our faith in these companies that have a history of bullshitting us and that their future plans are laid out to bullshit us, to then go turn back to them and say we have faith in that. They've not been good actors historically, and so I think what we have to do is to keep pursuing that and to call out that stuff but they're not taking it into account.
If I could actually add a very quick to that point. Yesterday, the Parliament published an exclusive
one final point. Thank you for this great talk. What can we do to help, right? Like, we've learned about the issue and the fact that we need change, so what can we do? What are the next steps for us in the audience?
Okay, I'll have a go. I think one really valuable thing you can do after this is turn to the person next to you that you don't know and just introduce yourself. Say hi, why you came, where you're coming from. That is really important. Building community is really important. The second thing you do, and one of the really valuable things that Anna Leibowitz, who started the No Donations Until Divestment letter, says, is like, where do you have power? Where do you have leverage? So we have power as Princeton alumni, but where else do you have power? Where can you leverage that power? So if you're a professor, where is your retirement pension invested? If you work somewhere, what is your company doing? And leveraging that power and organizing the people in that space. And then the last thing you can do really selfishly is to connect with us and help us do Divest Princeton's work. Claire's work only came together because she put in the time and a bunch of us put in the time to do research, to meet every week and to pull together questions and a research theory and agenda. So I think getting involved and helping out, people like Bob, people like Lynn, people like Hannah, getting involved, that is super, super valuable.
I'll just jump onto that. Agree with all of that, and always think about where money is coming from. That's kind of where my mind is at constantly, and what the interest of that money is. I think the conversation back to one of the questions asked earlier about divestment versus engagement is thinking about what false narratives might be out there and confronting those false narratives. And then the second thing is, in addition to talking to people here, talk to people elsewhere.
It's like boycott versus hey. your way.
I think you're good.
Thanks for your time.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Hey, what are you doing for lunch?
Oh, maybe. Wait, did you hear that? Wait, what did you hear about Tower?
Well, I heard they have food.
I think for members.
Yeah.
I might go there, but I also might just go home.
Okay. Will you be at the social?
Yeah.
As long as it's
It's in like 3 hours. I'm probably just gonna go home.
great. I was truly just like,
Will you be at the social?
I'm sure I have